So the first thing we're doing, this is when given a slope and a point. So make sure to go into that note on your book. It might not be in the right order, but it's totally fine. So you glued this one in. And so the first thing you're doing is plug in the slope for n. So first thing we're doing is plug in the slope for n. And so right here, I have y equals mx plus b. But now what are they telling me my slope is? Negative 1/4, right? So I know that that's going to be my n. And so when I'm rewriting it, instead of m, I'm going to write negative 1/4. I don't like how I wrote that. Again. And then I'm going to fill the rest of it in. Y equals negative 1/4 x plus b. So the first thing, when given a slope and a point, we just plug in the slope for n. And so I remember when I'm looking at slopes, they look like hills, right? And so an n looks like a bunch of slopes. So I remember that n means. The next thing we do is we take this point right here, because we know it goes through this point 4, negative 5, right? And so what we're going to do is plug in the x coordinate for x and the y coordinate in for y. And so what I mean, if I have this point, is for your x or your y coordinate? X. And so negative 5 would be my y, right? And so now when I'm rewriting this, instead of y, I'm going to put negative 5. Instead of x in parentheses, I'm going to put 4. And then I'm going to rewrite the equation like this. I would, just in case, because we need to know that we're multiplying. So when you put it in a calculator, it would be more clear. The next thing we're going to do is solve for b, or your y-intercept. So in your calculator, if you have one, remember what button can you press on your calculator to get a fraction? Remember what the button's called? ND, right? And so you can put negative 1/4 right into your calculator, or I can multiply across. What's 4 as a fraction? 4 over what? 1. And so when I rewrite this, I get negative 5. I'm going to put it in green. Negative 5 equals, what's negative 1 times 4? Negative 4, and 4 times 1? 4 plus b. If you put this right into your calculator, it should already give you an answer. So if you put negative 1/4 parentheses 4, it should already give you the answer. But here I'm doing it by hand. What is negative 4 divided by 4? Negative 1, right? So it skipped a step. Now all I'm doing is solving for b. How do I get that 1 to the other side? I add, right? And so you end up getting b, I'm going to write it right here, equals, what's negative 5 plus 1? Negative 4.
So you just add, multiply across?
Yeah, if you're doing it by hand, you could just multiply across. If you're doing it in your calculator, you can do it exactly how you did. Last thing I do is I write it in slope-intercept form like we did with the graphs yesterday. So I do y equals, and I know my slope is negative 1/4 x. And now I know my y-intercept is negative 4. So yesterday we did this using a graph. Now we're looking at a table and points. So that's your first delta math, is just practicing given a slope and a point. The next one we're going to go over is given 2 points. So there's only one additional step on that. And so make sure, again, your cell phones are away, or that you're not on them, at least put them upside down. So I want to make sure this is a big chunk, and this is what the open-ended is on too. So I want to make sure you're good with it. So here's my next one I'm going to be doing. Through 2 points. So there's only actually one additional piece to this. It's kind of just bouncing off the last one. Now I'm going to have to find the slope of the 2 points. So now we're on this next set of notes. And so my first step is find the slope of the 2 points. And we know that our equation is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, right? So what's the first thing I have to do when I see points? Taylor already said it. Label, right? And so first thing I should do is label. So I have x1, y1, x2, y2. And so you can see that's why we put it into our, that's why we did it as our do now, so that we can make sure we remember how to do this. Then what do? Plug it in, right? So instead of y2, I'm going to put -5 minus, and what's our y1? 1 over our x2, which is 2, minus, and our x1 is -4. Remember, you could put this right into ND button, and it will simplify it for you just in case. But if you want to do it by hand, what's -5 minus 1? That's it. That's +1. -6. And be careful. Make sure you use a calculator on your test too. What's 2? What does a minus make? A plus. What's 2 plus 4? 6. And so if you put that in your calculator, it would have reduced it automatically. But what is -6 divided by 6? -1. And so I know that -1 is my slope, or my m. So now I'm going to write the equation right here, but instead of m, I'm going to write my slope, -1.
Miss, was that the extra step?
Yeah, that's the only extra step you're going to have. Now we do the same thing, but now see how there's 2 different points? You're going to choose one. Now, it doesn't matter, like if Amir wanted to choose the first one and Christopher wanted to choose the second one, they would get the same answer. So it doesn't matter which one you choose, but what I don't want you to do is like, if you pick one of this x and that y, you wouldn't get the same answer. So it has to be the same point. So I'll choose the first one. If you want to choose the second one just to see that you get the same answer, you can. But all you're doing is you're choosing one point, the same x and y, and plug those values in for x and y. So I know that -4 is my x in this point, and 1 is my y. And so I'm going through the same steps I just did. So instead of y, I'm going to plug in 1. Instead of x, I'm going to plug in -4. So I plugged in my slope. So now I'm doing the exact same thing as I did in the previous problem. The only additional thing is finding the slope of the 2 points. Then next thing, just like the last problem, we're solving for b. So right here I have 1 equals, what's -1 times -4? +4, right? Then how do you get b by itself? Subtract 4. And you get b equals what? -30. Last step, just like the last one, is we're plugging our m and our b into our new equation. So y equals, and my slope I found up there was -1 x, and then my y-intercept is -3. Is this making sense? So this is the second back. The third one is the table, and the table's basically this, except it looks like a table. It's basically the same thing. So let's go to the table one now. That looks like this. And so it's basically the same thing. But I just wanted to show you 3 different representations because all 3 of these are open-ended on your test. So first, you can do it like Jalen did, where he circled his points and found the slope. Or you can sit here and if you know it's linear, find the change in y, or f of x, and over the change in x. However you want to do it, if you'd rather take 2 points and find the slope using the formula, that's fine too. But what we're going to do is find the change in y, or f of x, over the change in x. So what's the change in y, or f of x, from 14 to 10?
40.
Is it adding or subtracting 4? Subtracting 4. So I know I'm probably going to have a negative slope. What about my change in x from here to here? Adding 2, right? So I know, and I guess I can write it over here. I know my change in x is adding 2. And I know my change in y is subtracting 4.
What's the next one?
So the next thing is reduce that fraction. So right here, so reduce the slope if necessary. So what is negative 4 over 2 reduced to? Negative 2. So I know my slope is negative 2. If you wanted to circle 2 points and write them as points and find the slope, you can also do that. So I can do 3, 14, 5, 10, and plug it into that equation to get the same answer. Next thing, we're doing the same exact thing as the last one. Choose one point, the same x and y, and plug those values in for x and y. So you can choose any of these, but just make sure they're the same. Like I can't choose 9 and 6. It has to be buddies right next to each other. So right here, I'll choose like 9 and 2. And so right here, what am I going to plug in for x, and what am I going to plug in for y? For x, I'm going to be plugging in 9, and for y, I'm going to be plugging in 2, and rewrite the equation.
9.
Yeah, 9 is your x. Just make sure you're plugging them in the correct places, because you want to make sure that you got that down. Then, same thing we've been doing, solve for b. So when we do that,
Is that a question? No, it's what you did as first. Is that a scale? That's what it's.
Yeah, so find the slope. So basically finding the slope of the table. Yeah. So when we solve for b, we get 2 equals, what's negative 2 times 9? Negative 18 plus b. How do I get b by itself?
No,
Add 18. Good. And you end up getting b equals 20. I know it goes into the next one. Last thing is you just write the equation. So my equation is y equals negative 2, because that was my slope, x plus 20. So that's the third delta method.
Are we doing Nelson Mathis period?
Okay. I'm also going to, I know it's a lot in one period, and it's just because it should have been 2 different lessons, but I want to just give you everything at once so we can have the whole Monday to review, and then the test Tuesday. So the last thing we're going to do is a word problem. Kind of look at that. So that's the last note that's on your paper. So the last note on your paper is this one right here. And so this, do you guys, can I have a volunteer read this out loud? Anybody? Thank you.
An airplane leaves New York City and heads towards Los Angeles. As they climb, the plane gradually increases its altitude, at which time it maintains a constant speed for several hours as long as it stays at altitude. After flying for 32 minutes, the plane reaches peak altitude and is 492 miles. After flying for a total of 92 minutes, the plane has peaked a total of 762 miles. Then remind the speed of the plane at cruising altitude in miles per minute.
Perfect. So what we're doing, see how there's two situations, like at this happens. At this happens. Whenever you see that, even on the SAT, ACT, this is on it a lot, milestone, we always write them as points. And so the first thing you want to do is you kind of want to color code and figure out, okay, what are the two units they're talking about? We can see they're talking about minutes, and they're also talking about miles and miles. And we want to make sure they're in the same units. Sometimes they'll try to confuse you and give it to you in hours, and you'll have to convert them. So the first thing you want to do is write your points. And so since 32 comes first, I'm going to have that be my x. So my x is going to represent minutes. And so the only thing that's different between this and what we just did is identifying the points. So 32 minutes, he went 192 miles. And so that means my y would be miles. And then in 92 minutes, he went 762 miles. So that's the first thing you want to do, is identify what are they talking about. And this is how your question is going to look on your test. It's an open-ended that looks like this. And so you know when you're given two situations, you're just writing them as points and finding the slope. So remember, we could do x1, y1, x2, y2, and then you plug it into your slope formula. So see if you could try to plug that into your slope formula and see what you end up getting. So plug that right into your slope formula, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Let's see what you end up getting. So for y2, at this point, you should have at least plugged in 762 minus 192 over 92 minus 32. If you need a calculator, raise your hand, I'll come around. Anyone else? All right, so what do we get when you subtracted these? What is it? 570 over 60. Beautiful. Then divide that into your calculator and see if you get. What do you end up getting? Yeah, 19 over 2, and then when you actually divide it, they want this one as a decimal, which is just 9.5. When you divide 19, divide by 2. So it's 9.5 miles per minute. So that means the plane is going 9.5 miles per minute. So that's the slope. The next thing they want you to do is write the equation. So that's like what we just did. And so we know, first we know our slope is 9.5, so we're going to plug that in for n. Yeah. And then choose a point. It doesn't matter which one you choose, but make sure it's the same x and y. So don't choose like 32 and 762, because that wouldn't get you the right answer. So I'm just going to choose the first one. If you want to choose the second one and just make sure you get the same answer as me, that works too. So your y, for y I would plug in 192 equals 9.5, and instead of x, I would plug in 32. Just make sure you're plugging them in the correct places too. Some people like to plug in x into y because it's first. So make sure you guys are plugging them in the right places. Then we just solve. What is 9.5 times 32? What is it? 300. 304. Then how do we get b by itself? Subtract 304. And you end up getting b equals what? Was it negative? No. So that means the plane starts below sea level because it's negative. So if that does make sense, because you know how like sometimes we're really high above sea level, like it's just different everywhere. So this plane starting below sea level. And the last one's saying, assuming the plane maintains its speed, they want to find the total number of miles the plane has flown in 2 hours. Now, do they want, what are our units in up here? Minutes and miles, right? So we don't want to plug in 2. That's what they want you to do. And this is an old milestone question. So this is the type of questions they would ask you on your open-ended. So they don't want it in hours, they want it in minutes. So remember, if hours is on the numerator here, where does hours go on the next one? Denominator. And this is on your midterm too. So you want to make sure you remember this. And so remember, 1 hour is how many minutes? 60 minutes. Now I can cross out hours and I know my time is in minutes. Then what do we do right here? Multiply across. So what's 6 times 20? Or 60 times 2? 120 over 1, which is 120. And now they want me to just plug it in for x in that equation, because my x is my minutes. This is wrong, but I just want to make sure you get this all out there before. Not the word problems, but there are word problems on the study guide. And so when I do this, what is 9.5 times 120? You can put this right into your calculator. Like, so it looks like that. 1,140. Is that the whole thing? You can put the whole thing in the calculator. Or is that just this times this? That times that. And then what's that minus 112? What is it? I don't mind. 1,028. And 1,128 miles. And I have an extra practice for this too, so I'm going to give that to you if you want extra credit. It's just a word problem that looks like this, and I'll give that to you, and you can do it over the weekend for some extra credit, especially if you know you're going to need help with this. So what we're going to do now, if you guys want to